When a biker gang pulled a gun on his wife, one quiet old man said 5 words that made them all freeze. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. The axe bit clean through the log, the sound echoing once before the stillness of the valley swallowed it whole. Jack Merrin leaned on the handle for a second, breath steady but slow, not from exhaustion, just age. The cold of the morning hadn't yet lifted, and the steam from his breath curled in the air as he turned to gather another round from the stack. The sun crept lazily above the ridge, setting a soft orange glow across the dew-soaked grass. It was the kind of morning most folks would call peaceful. For Jack, it was just routine. He split wood until the stack was even, then tossed a few logs into the basket by the back door. The dog, a rust-colored mutt named Tank, watched from the porch, tail thudding once every few seconds against the boards. Jack scratched behind his ear as he passed, a silent good morning, and stepped inside just long enough to start the coffee pot. Elaine would be up soon. She liked it ready when she wandered into the kitchen, hair still a little wild, wearing one of his old flannels over her nightgown. Some habits never needed correcting. By mid-morning, Jack was in the truck, a couple of fence posts in the bed and a coil of wire rattling beside them. A neighbor's steer had found a way out again, 3rd time this season. Jack didn't mind. It gave him something to do, and he figured if he could still fix a fence, he had no business complaining about his age. He worked steady, not fast, hands remembering more than they should have after all these years. Muscle memory was a gift time hadn't taken yet. Most folks in town knew him as the quiet guy who sat 3 rows from the front at Sunday service, the one who helped put up folding chairs at events and never said no when someone needed a hand. He was the first to arrive at potlucks and the last to leave, always the one sweeping up or folding tables. What they didn't know, and what Jack never offered, was who he'd been before the mountain house, before the old dog and the volunteer hours, before Elaine pulled him back from the edge of something darker. There were no medals on display, no plaques or flags or shelves of neatly folded uniforms. If you opened the closet in his shed, you might find a trunk with a lock that didn't match the others, buried under spare tarps and rusted tools. But you'd have to know it was there, and nobody did. Elaine called him in just after noon. Lunch was sandwiches and soup, her way of saying, "I know you overdid it again," without actually saying it. He smiled at her as he sat down. They didn't need many words. 46 years of marriage taught them how to communicate in glances, pauses, the tilt of a head. She squeezed his hand once, and he squeezed back. It was nothing but a quiet afternoon, just like every other, until it wasn't. Elaine kissed him on the cheek as she grabbed her canvas tote, filled with paperback mysteries and leftover banana bread. "Book club," she said, like she always did, though she didn't need to. Jack had already checked the time, already knew it was Thursday. He opened the door for her anyway, leaned against the frame as she backed the Subaru out of the gravel drive, one hand raised in a lazy wave. He didn't move until the sound of the tires faded behind the curve of trees. Tank stirred from his spot on the porch, but didn't bother standing. Jack stepped into his boots, shrugged on his jacket, and took the long way around the house. Just walking, really. Habit. Elaine called it his perimeter check, like they were still stationed overseas and not tucked into the safest corner of the Blue Ridge Mountains. But Jack never corrected her. Some routines got into the bones. He followed the edge of the property, the same path he'd walked 1,000 times before. Everything looked the same. The rusted mailbox nailed to the fence post, the old metal basin filled with birdseed, the field where deer sometimes passed through if dusk came early. But when he reached the rear trail, something pulled at him. It wasn't the noise. It wasn't even a smell. It was the silence that shifted, subtle as a breath held too long. Jack crouched near the brush, where the gravel path turned to soil. The morning's rain had softened the earth just enough. 2 tire tracks, deep, recent, and wrong. Not his truck, not Elaine's car, not the neighbor's. These were wide, too wide, something with weight, off-road tread. He stood slowly, eyes scanning the tree line. No broken branches, no litter. Whoever had come through didn't stay long. Could have been kids on ATVs. Could have been hunters who'd taken a wrong turn and backed out fast. Could have been nothing. Still, the back of his neck felt tight. Not fear, just alertness. A switch clicking on. He walked the rest of the loop slower than before, listening. Tank met him near the shed, tail wagging, none the wiser. Jack gave him a slow pat on the head and pulled the door shut behind them. Inside, he stood for a long moment staring at the workbench, at the clutter of tools, jars of nails, coiled extension cords, all the things that made up his quiet life. He reached up, slid a tarp aside, and touched the trunk, just once, a knuckle against the lid. Then he let it be. Back in the kitchen, he washed his hands, made tea, folded the towel on the counter with a precision that felt more like ritual than necessity. Nothing to worry about. Probably kids. Probably nothing. He told himself that twice. But when he sat in his chair by the window, he looked toward the trees and didn't look away. The sun had just begun to sink behind the ridge when Jack lit the porch lantern. The sky was still streaked with blue and amber, shadows stretching long across the clearing. He liked this hour. The stillness, the hush before night truly settled in. The dog lay at his feet, twitching occasionally in a half-dream, one ear up just in case. Jack rocked gently in his chair, hands folded across his chest, his mind quiet. Then came the sound. It started low, like distant thunder, but it grew. The unmistakable growl of engines, multiple, not trucks, not quads, motorcycles, big ones, aggressive, not the kind that passed through town on scenic rides. These were heavier, harsher, and they weren't moving fast. They were approaching with purpose. Jack stood. The dog was already on all fours, hackles raised. From the front porch, he could see headlights bobbing through the trees at the edge of the clearing, 12 of them, maybe more. One by one, the bikes emerged into view, forming a staggered line as they rolled past the fence and into the open space near his barn. They weren't wearing colors he recognized, but that didn't mean much. He wasn't looking at patches. He was looking at posture, movement, eyes. They cut their engines at the same time. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Jack stepped off the porch without hurry. No rifle in hand, no pistol at his side, just an old man in worn boots and a canvas jacket. He walked halfway across the yard, stopped a few paces short of the first bike, and met their stares with a stillness that belonged to someone who'd been in louder rooms, darker places. The man in front dismounted first, leather vest, scarred knuckles, a jaw that looked like it had been broken more than once. He didn't speak right away, just stared at Jack, like he was trying to reconcile what he saw with what he expected. "This Mason live here?" the man finally asked. His voice was flat, but not polite. Jack's eyes didn't waver. "No one by that name here." "Don't lie to me, old man." "I don't," Jack replied. The biker looked to his left, then to his right. Two others dismounted. One lit a cigarette. Another took a slow walk around the edge of the clearing like he was mapping the place. Jack didn't move. He didn't ask questions. He didn't volunteer anything. Silence, used right, could say plenty. The leader stepped forward, closer now, eyes narrowing. "He stole from us," he said. "Something valuable." Jack didn't flinch. "I don't know him, and you're trespassing." The man tilted his head. A smile, but not a kind one. "We'll see." Behind him, the others fanned out. The quiet valley, once full of crickets and soft wind, now bristled with tension. The dog growled low, and somewhere down the road, headlights appeared. Elaine's car heading home. The man finally gave his name without being asked. Kane. Just Kane. The kind of name meant to be remembered or feared. He stood a half step ahead of the others, clearly the one they followed, though no one said it out loud. Authority didn't always need announcing. "We don't care about you," Kane said, voice even, like he was reading from a script rehearsed on long rides. "We're just here for a kid. Mason, 17, skinny, dumb enough to rip off something he shouldn't have." He paused, eyes narrowing. Said he was headed this way. Said he'd find shelter out here. Jack didn't recognize the name. He knew most of the town, even the kids who tried too hard to be trouble. Mason wasn't one of them. Still, he didn't rush to answer. "I haven't seen him," Jack said calmly. "He's not here." Kane stared at him for a beat too long. "See? I don't believe that." Jack said nothing. One of the bikers paced behind Kane, chewing a toothpick, eyes roaming the property. Another lifted a tarp near the barn and looked underneath. Tank barked once, low and sharp, but Jack gave a short whistle, and the dog stopped. Kane watched the exchange with faint amusement, like he'd seen something that confirmed a suspicion. "You're calm," Kane said. "Too calm." Jack shrugged slightly. "I've lived through worse." The wind shifted. Somewhere in the trees, a branch cracked. Kane's men moved like they were trained to, scanning, alert, hands near their jackets where weapons likely waited. Jack noticed it, but didn't react. His pulse didn't change. His voice didn't rise. "I'm telling you," Jack said slowly, clearly, "he's not here. You're wasting your time." "Maybe," Kane said, "but I don't like wasting time, so maybe we do a little search." "You do that," Jack replied, "and things might not stay quiet." Kane smiled again, but this time it was thinner. He turned to say something to the man behind him, and that's when the distant glow of headlights appeared at the bend in the trees. Elaine. Jack didn't move, but his eyes tracked the light. Her car was half a minute from the driveway, probably with a bag of muffins from Margaret's and the new mystery book she'd mentioned before leaving. She wouldn't expect anything. Wouldn't have time to. Kane noticed too. His eyes followed Jack's for a second, then flicked toward one of the younger men near the front. The message passed in a glance. "She yours?" the biker asked, cracking his knuckles. Jack's voice didn't waver. "Go inside. You'll find nothing but tools and rust. That's the truth." But they weren't listening anymore. The first engine started up again, ready to block the road. Jack's shoulders tightened just slightly as the Subaru's headlights cut across the clearing, washing over chrome, leather, and too many watching eyes. The gravel crunched beneath the Subaru's tires as Elaine pulled into the driveway, her face dimly visible through the windshield, calm, unsuspecting. Her eyes caught the crowd just as she slowed to a stop. The confusion hit first, brows knitting, lips parting slightly, as if to form a question that never got the chance to leave her mouth. She opened the door and stepped out, tote bag slung over one shoulder, car keys still in hand. "Jack?" she called, voice laced with uncertainty. "What's going on?" Before Jack could answer, one of the younger bikers, nervous, coiled too tight, spun toward her. The motion was instinctive, fueled by adrenaline, not judgment. The pistol came up fast, both hands wrapped around the grip. His finger rested just beside the trigger, but his arms were stiff, locked. Bad posture, bad training. But it didn't matter. A weapon's still a weapon, even in the wrong hands. Elaine froze mid-step, eyes widening as the realization hit. The tote slid down her arm and landed in the dirt with a soft thump. Jack didn't flinch. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't shout. He took one step forward, then another, each slow, deliberate. "Put it down," Jack said. Not a plea, not a threat, just a command, low and steady, like he was talking to someone in the middle of a minefield. The biker hesitated. Kane didn't say anything. He was watching Jack now, really watching him, as if trying to understand something he hadn't seen before. Jack's calm wasn't bravado. It wasn't nerves masked by age. It was stillness earned in places darker than this. "She's not who you're looking for," Jack said. "She's my wife. That's groceries in that bag. That's banana bread and paperback novels. She didn't take anything from you." The young biker's arms trembled slightly, a barely visible shake. The safety was off. "Lower the weapon," Jack said again, tone unchanged. "Before you do something you can't undo." Elaine hadn't moved. Her hands were half raised, palms open, but her eyes were on Jack now, steady, trusting. She didn't need to say a word. Kane finally stepped forward, just a few paces, voice quiet but pointed. He said, "She's clean. That should be enough." The pistol wavered. then dropped. Not all the way, but down. Elaine exhaled. Jack did not. He kept his eyes on the one with the gun until he stepped back. No shouting, no chaos. Just one old man who hadn't lost his command presence, standing between his wife and a mistake that could have ruined lives. The air settled, but only just. The threat hadn't passed. Not really. The weight of what almost happened still hung there, thick and sour. Jack moved to Elaine slowly, placing a hand on her arm. She was shaking, but trying not to show it. He whispered something meant only for her. Then he turned back toward Kane and said 5 words. The night didn't breathe. It held its breath. Kane's eyes were on Jack, studying him like a man suddenly realizing he'd misread every line of a map. The others were quiet now too. No more casual movement, no more half-threats in their posture, just stillness. Uneasy, tight, like a coiled spring waiting for release. Jack stepped slightly forward, his hand still resting lightly on Elaine's arm. She hadn't spoken. She didn't need to. The trust in her silence said everything. Jack's voice was calm, without ceremony or volume. "Tell Briggs Merrin says hello." No one spoke. The words hit like a gunshot no one heard. Silent, but world-shifting. It wasn't the sentence, it was the name. Briggs. It dropped into the clearing like a weight, and for a moment even the crickets stopped. One of the bikers, a wiry man with faded tattoos up his neck, visibly paled. His hand fell away from the grip of his weapon, like it had burned him. Another turned his head toward Kane, unsure, eyes wide. Kane didn't blink. Jack just looked at him. "Briggs?" the youngest of the crew asked, voice breaking through the stillness. "As in, yeah," someone else said, barely above a whisper. "That Briggs." The weight in the air wasn't confusion anymore. It was recognition. It was the sudden shifting of power, silent, invisible, but absolute. Kane's jaw tightened. He didn't ask how Jack knew Briggs. Didn't need to. You don't name a ghost unless you're part of the same story. Jack didn't move. He didn't explain. The silence filled in the rest. Briggs had built this crew. He wasn't just a name. They wore his decisions inked into their skin. Some of them owed him everything. Others feared him more than they feared prison time. But Briggs didn't talk much anymore. Not since the accident. Not since the fallout. Most of the newer recruits hadn't even met him, just heard stories. And now here stood an old man, boots planted in the dirt, a calm hand on his wife's shoulder, who just casually invoked that name like he was asking someone to pass the salt. Kane's lips parted slightly, as if to respond, but nothing came out. Jack tilted his head, just enough to push the silence. "Or I can call him myself." That made Kane blink. Finally. He raised a hand slowly, not in surrender, but in pause. He turned halfway toward one of the bikers near the edge, the one who hadn't said a word all night. A nod passed between them. The man pulled out a phone and stepped away. The group didn't disband, didn't relax, but the temperature dropped. The aggression slipped, replaced by something colder, older. Jack hadn't raised a weapon. He didn't need to, because some names were more powerful than threats. And some men didn't have to prove who they were. They just had to remind the right people who still remembered. The man with the phone stepped away into the shadows, just far enough for a private call, but not out of earshot if things turned ugly. The others waited, jittery now, in a way that had nothing to do with adrenaline. One of them kicked at the gravel nervously. Another lit a cigarette with hands that weren't quite steady. No one looked at Jack directly anymore. Not after what he said. Kane's face was tight, eyes fixed on Jack like he was seeing him for the first time. The calm old man with the firewood and the rusted pickup truck didn't fit anymore. Not after Briggs's name came out of his mouth. Not with that kind of weight. The phone call ended quickly. The man who made it returned in silence, face unreadable. He stepped close to Kane and leaned in. Whatever he said was quiet, but the impact was visible. Kane's jaw locked, his hands clenched. Then he exhaled through his nose, like he'd been holding in more than breath. Jack didn't speak. He didn't ask what Briggs had said. He already knew. Kane stepped forward. "You served?" he asked, not mocking now, just smaller. Jack nodded once. "Where?" "Places you can't find on a map." Kane hesitated. "Briggs said you saved his life, said you disappeared after the mission went sideways." Jack said nothing. Was it true? Jack looked him dead in the eye. "I pulled him out of a burning compound 6 miles behind a line we weren't supposed to cross. Carried him on my back while half a country tried to make sure we didn't reach the border. We made it. I left. That's all there is." Kane shook his head slowly. "He talks about that night like it broke him." Jack's voice was quiet. "It broke all of us." The wind passed through the trees like it was listening. Briggs had been a legend in their world once, not just as a biker, but before that, back when his name wasn't Briggs yet, before the bullet severed his spine, before the mission that went unmentioned in any official file. Most of his men didn't even know the whole story, just rumors, half-whispers, scars and silence. But now they knew. They'd rolled up on a ghost, a man who had saved the one person none of them would ever dare cross, and never asked for thanks, never called in favors, never bragged, just disappeared into the trees and chopped wood for the next 30 years, like it meant nothing. They didn't just threaten a stranger. They pulled a gun on the man who made their entire crew possible. Kane's eyes dropped for the first time. The fight was gone. "You should have said something," he muttered. Jack didn't blink. Shouldn't have needed to. No one argued, because there are some men who don't carry their history on their sleeve. They carry it in how everyone else reacts when the truth finally shows up. Kane pulled the phone from his vest and stared at it for a moment, like he was holding something hot and uncertain. His thumb hovered over the screen before he tapped the number. It rang once, then again. The others watched in silence, the weight of what they were about to witness starting to settle in their stomachs. Briggs didn't answer often. Not unless it mattered. The call clicked through. No video, just voice. "Yeah?" came the gravelly tone, dry and low, like a man who'd been through hell and come out the other side with his humor burned off. Kane cleared his throat. "It's me. We're at a place outside Whalen Ridge, a house off Firebrush Road. Belongs to a guy named Jack Merrin." There was a pause. Then, "Say that name again." "Merrin. Jack Merrin." Another pause. Longer this time. Static hummed across the speaker like it was holding its breath. Then Briggs spoke. "Put me on speaker." Kane obeyed without hesitation. He didn't look at Jack as he did it. Briggs's voice now filled the air, clear, sharp, suddenly more alive than any of them had heard him in years. "Jack," he said. Not a question, not a guess, just confirmation. Jack nodded, even though the man on the other end couldn't see him. "Briggs, still walking around like the world owes you nothing, I bet." "I only take what I earn." A short, raspy laugh crackled through the phone, the sound of memory, not joy. Briggs's tone shifted then, harder, sharper, for everyone to hear. "You listen to me, all of you. That man standing in front of you, you don't touch him, you don't threaten him, you don't even breathe wrong in his direction. Jack Merrin is not to be messed with, not today, not ever. He's owed a debt." Silence from the crew. Briggs added one more line, the kind none of them had heard in years. He's owed a debt, and then some. It wasn't just approval, it wasn't just respect, it was reverence, the kind of line that ended arguments before they started. Kane swallowed, the muscles in his jaw working. Understood. Briggs didn't say goodbye. The call ended without warning. Just a quiet click, and the dull hush of crickets returning to the night. Jack didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just looked at Kane, calm as ever. Kane nodded, once. One of the bikers, the one who'd pulled the gun on Elaine, stepped backward, as if realizing for the first time he might have stood inches from his own undoing. They hadn't just stormed into the home of a stranger. They'd kicked down the door of a legend and walked away lucky to still be standing. The stillness stretched out for a moment longer, thick and heavy, until finally Kane gave a small, sharp nod to his crew. A silent order. Stand down. Back off. No words were needed. They understood. The biker closest to Elaine moved first. He stepped carefully, like the ground itself might break if he wasn't careful. He bent and picked up her fallen tote bag, brushing off the dirt with hands that shook more than he wanted them to. He didn't meet her eyes as he offered it back, just held it out, shoulders hunched in something that wasn't quite shame, but wasn't far from it either. Elaine hesitated only a moment before taking it. Her hand was steady. Jack didn't move, didn't tell her what to do. She knew how to read a room as well as he did. Another biker, one with a jagged scar curling around his ear, mumbled something barely audible. "Sorry, Mom." The words seemed foreign in his mouth, rough and unpracticed, but real. Elaine, still wrapped in a calmness she didn't feel, gave a small nod in return. That was enough. Kane lingered last. His boots crunched on the gravel as he took a slow step toward Jack, stopping a few paces away. His eyes held something new now. Not anger, not resentment, something harder to fake. Respect, cut with the sharp edge of fear. Jack didn't speak, neither did Kane. They didn't need to. Kane gave a tight nod, just once, and then turned sharply, barking a command to his men with a jerk of his head. Engines growled to life almost in unison, the bikes vibrating the earth beneath their feet. No roaring departures, no wheel spins or thrown gravel, just the controlled rumble of retreat. The pack peeled away one by one, headlights slicing through the trees, taillights winking out into the night. Jack and Elaine stood side by side and watched them go, the glow of the porch lantern painting long shadows across the clearing. Tank barked once from the porch as the last bike disappeared down the ridge. Jack reached down and gave the dog a single reassuring pat without looking away from the road. The night folded back in on itself slowly. The sounds of crickets returned. The breeze through the pines started whispering again, like the earth itself was exhaling. The moment was over, but its shape still lingered in the air. In the small shifts of Jack's shoulders, the way Elaine's fingers tightened slightly on the strap of her bag. Jack finally looked at her, a question in his eyes. He didn't bother speaking. Elaine gave him a look back, worn, tired, but unbroken. Together, without a word, they turned and walked toward the house. Behind them, the clearing stood empty again, but not the same. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering light across the living room walls. Elaine sat curled into the corner of the couch, wrapped in one of Jack's old army blankets, a mug of tea resting in both hands. Her eyes were fixed on the flames, not really watching, just letting the warmth seep into her bones. A bruise was beginning to bloom on her forearm where she'd fallen, faint but deep. She hadn't mentioned it, and Jack hadn't asked. Not yet. Outside, the early morning frost clung to the edges of the windows. The sun hadn't risen fully, but the sky was turning from black to grey. Jack stood on the back porch, hands wrapped around the handle of his axe, boots planted in last night's cold. He took a breath, looked at the log in front of him, and swung. The crack of wood splitting echoed once through the clearing, then again. Each motion was precise, not rushed, not angry, just steady, like everything else Jack did. It was a rhythm older than the house, older than his quiet routines. He wasn't trying to forget anything. He wasn't pretending nothing had happened. He was simply returning to what he could control, one swing at a time. There were no patrol cars at the end of the driveway. No apologies from officials, no morning news choppers circling overhead. No one called to ask what had happened, but the neighborhood knew. Even if they didn't know the full story, they knew something. People like Jack didn't go their entire lives unnoticed. Not really. They just became part of the backdrop, until something pulled the curtain back. Tank lay on the porch again, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed. He watched Jack, with the kind of loyalty that needed no explanation. A few birds had returned to the feeder, chirping quietly as if testing the air for safety. Inside the house, Elaine shifted slightly, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her tea had gone cold, but she didn't move to replace it. She just sat, breathing slowly, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the mug. Jack finished the row of wood and stood for a moment, axe resting against his shoulder. He looked out over the tree line, eyes scanning nothing in particular. The path the bikers had come down was empty now. The tracks would still be visible if you looked close, but give it a week, and the wind would take care of them. He set the axe down gently against the wall of the shed and rolled his shoulder. The pain there was old, familiar. There would be no medals, no citations, no names in headlines. Just 5 words, said in the right moment, to the right people, by a man who hadn't forgotten who he was, only chosen not to lead with it, and that was enough. He stepped back inside, quiet as always, back to the woman he protected, back to the quiet life he'd earned, back to the firewood.